Hi folks, this week we are talking about alternate light source or ALS photography. Alright, so just so we understand what we're talking about here, alternate light source deals with light sources that are not typically part of the visual spectrum. So light is basically energy. Energy is out there in waves, and so simple physics here. What we are able to see is the Roy G. Biv of the rainbow, so our spectrum from red to some sort of purple type colors. And when you look at the actual wavelengths of energy out there, you have everything from cosmic rays to your radio and television broadcast signals that go out on waves. And so in this little spectrum of energy is what we can see. And just above what we can see is infrared, and just below what we can see is ultraviolet light. And so what we can end up with here then is using alternate light source generating devices, because typically the light coming from the sun, the light coming from most of our light bulbs, we consider to be white light or just colorless light. So what we can do is add a colored light. Now there's lots of different alternate light source systems out there. You have everything from flashlights, which are easy transporting into our crime scenes, easy to use. You have polylights, which require electrical power, and these will run through a gamut of different lighting sources from ultraviolet light through a couple different wavelengths of spectrum of light. So it might put out a blue light, might put out a red light, depending on which button you push. Just like here you see with the flashlights, we have a blue light, an orange light, a red light, a pure white light, a black light, aka UV light, and then a green light. And then here is a coherent light source. A coherent light is another word for a laser beam. And this laser happens to put out a coherent beam of green light. So you look at our spectrum here of visible light. What it's putting out is not just like a filter in front of the lens, so that it's a light bulb that kind of is pitched reddish color. No, they're actually putting out a wavelength of energy that is either 400 nanometers, 500 nanometers, 600 nanometers, 700 nanometers. What are the spectrum that they're trying to get from that waveform? Now here's the thing: human eyes, while we can see these colors, you can see blue and yellow and green and whatnot, the reflected energy back off of these images we can't see. Our human eye can't see that, especially in the ultraviolet and infrared. We can't see that. And so what we end up needing is filters of some kind to allow us to see the reflection. So that's why you see these two sets of goggles down here. Likewise, you see this filter that can be added onto a camera lens. So this way we can actually see and we can process the return from these alternate light sources. So giving you some examples here of what alternate light source can do. These rays of energy can go through a material and come back and get a response. And so now, a charred document that is hard to read, we can actually read it because, the light energy is bouncing off of the text and coming back to the camera in a situation where it's now going to be, pronounced. You can still see the charring, but you can actually read the text much better than you can over here. Obliterated writing is something that is popular, especially when you start dealing with like fraudulent checks and various kinds of frauds, where somebody can change something to something else, and certain inks, when used, can reflect the light better than other inks, and you actually end up being able to see what's behind the paint. Fingerprinting is fairly popular also. So what we can end up doing here is using some of our ALS systems. Remember back in the Intro to Forensic Science class, we talk about some of our fingerprint powders fluorescing. We talked about like the ultra powders. And so those ultra powders fluoresce. So here we have, with the room lights on, you can see this red powder. But then we hit it on with a UV light and, pop. That powder pops right back out to us so we can see it quite easily. Likewise, here again we have a situation where we've got, this fingerprint, we can see it fairly well. But with UV light, you can see it much better. What helps us out here too is, take a look at these backgrounds. These backgrounds are very busy. It's hard to really see the print pattern. So what I can do now is photograph it with UV light, because now the room is dark. We've turned off the light, so we don't have any ambient light coming from the room. And so now you really don't see that label from the soda bottle anymore. All you see is the fingerprint. The orange and the raspberry are basically invisible to us, and all we're seeing is our fingerprint. Same with this from a menu. These flames and these letters really obscure our ability to make out the print design here, but now we've darkened out the room, and so the ALS is allowing us to actually just see the print pattern, and you get a little sense of the background image that's on this menu, but you're really not looking at it. Bodily fluids, think about some of our crime scenes where we have bodily fluids left behind. Using ALS, we can see them much better. Helps us with a little bit of that question too. Is this a stain of whatever origin, or is this a bodily fluid? So we can hit it with the ALS. So you can see, there's something on this paper towel. It could be any number of things, but when we hit it with the ALS, it's right there. You can see it perfectly. Likewise, maybe this carpeting. You can tell there's something here on this carpeting. Sometimes maybe you can't even see it. And boy, when we hit it with the ALS, it's right there. You know you've got that. Gunshot residue, when we start talking about looking at gunshot victims and doing some of our range estimations. Remember, again, from back in the Intro to CSI class or Intro to Forensic Science class, gunshot range estimations are really starting to become kind of tenuous. Used to have people would say, oh, it's like 5 feet away or 6 feet away, and it's like it's a contact shot, nearly contact shot, or distance shot. But you can start to kind of get some ideas of range estimation where you might not see gunshot residue on a lot of fabrics, but you hit it with ALS and all these little speckles start giving you some idea of our possible distance to our shooter from our victim. Same here. Again, you've got all these speckles here, and under normal lighting conditions you would see these little grease marks and this discolorization here, but all these speckles would be very hard to see. Blood stains. When you have dark colored clothing, sometimes blood stains are not easy to see. You can tell that there potentially might be some fluid or liquid on a article of clothing. You might be able to tell that something is dried there, but you can't quite tell what it is, And so we can use ALS to bring out blood stains from a piece of clothing. It does work a lot better also when we use chemicals such as Blue Star or luminol. Blue Star is becoming much more popular because Blue Star fluoresces naturally, so you can see that without even needing the ALS, versus luminol. It glows. You need it to be really dark, and you typically need ALS to really get it to see. Blue Star you can pretty much do without anything. Blue Star 2, it was originally developed more so for hunters than us in forensic science, and so it was designed so that folks out in the woods could spray this down and find and track a deer that they had hit, but not a great shot. One other thing with ALS is our deep tissue injuries. Now, with deep tissue injuries, you pretty much need a UV camera. A lot of the other topics we've talked about, you can use a standard camera and have just the UV filters put on them, or the various ALS filters put on them, and that will help you see some of those fluorescings. But as it relates to deep tissue injuries, we actually need a UV camera. They're rather expensive. But what you can do is using UV light and a camera that is designed with a CMOS sensor to actually be picking up the UV spectrum versus filtering it through. What you can actually see is the deep tissue bruising. So here we've got a young man who, bumped into the wall, and, there's like a visible bruise. But when you actually look at it under UV light, the deep tissue where the bruising is versus the skin, you can actually see that it wraps all the way around his arm. And you can see that is not just this line of bruise, but that somebody was grabbing him and squeezing him, more to the point where you can actually see the fingers are set like this, digging in, causing pressure, versus if somebody had bumped into the wall, there should be an even amount of pressure across the bruise. And here you can kind of get a sense of that, but the fact that you don't have deep tissue bruising in this area, that's just an extension of the bruise. If somebody just bumped into the wall, this kid was grabbed and squeezed and shook, and that gives us this deep tissue bruising looking like this. So we're starting to see more and more cases, domestic violence situations and whatnot, where folks enjoy getting these kinds of images to show the bruising pattern, even history of bruising, where you might not have a bruise visible here on the surface anymore, but down here in the UV image you have a second bruise because the deep tissue areas are still healing. Pardon my cough. A little bit of a sinus infection here this week. All right, so that is what we have to talk about as it relates to UV photography. There's some really good explanations in your book, some amazing photographs, even looking at some of the things with shoes and tire marks. I really like the one photo with the blue star showing the car and how some of these chemicals even react after a cleanup. And you've cleaned up a scene, and you will still get results from luminol and blue star and some of these different chemicals, because the cleanup process is not 100% with a lot of people. And there's that really cool image of that car where you can see the blood going along the side of the car. But I digress. If anybody has any questions, please contact me. Let me know. Otherwise, you have your discussion question for this week, and because you don't have access to any ALS systems, there is no photographic assignment this week, unfortunately. All right, have a good week. Talk to you next week.